Good afternoon and welcome. I am Councilmember Jason Dozier. I'm the chair of the Community Development and Human Services Committee, and I called this meeting to order. I am joined by colleagues, Councilmember Byron Amos to my right, and to my left, Councilmember Matt Westmoreland, Councilmember Jason Winston, and we have a special guest with us today, Councilmember Marcy Collier Overstreet. Before we adopt the agenda, I just want to take just a couple of minutes to acknowledge something that I feel I didn't get a chance to acknowledge last week. I had some health issues that wasn't able to make it to full council last week. And typically in our council meetings, we are able to do a moment of silence or reflection for things that have happened in our communities or things that have happened close to us. And I wanted to acknowledge, especially as I have some neighbors here from the Mechanicsville community, we lost one of our community members who has been at the forefront in our fight against gun violence in our neighborhoods, a gentleman named Terrence Favors, who, even though lost his 15-year-old son earlier this year to gun violence, even though he was at the scene of what I like to describe as a mass shooting, even though I feel like the national media doesn't cover our communities in this way, even though they should. Two of our neighbors were killed, April Sparks and Rashad Rogers, and unfortunately we had a 6-year-old who was harmed in that same incident. He was there to take that 6-year-old to medical care, and then just a month later lost his own life to gun violence. So I want to just do a moment of silence in honor of them, in honor of our communities. And I know this isn't a public safety meeting, but I know our work has so much impact on our public safety posture. And so if you will join me in a quick moment of silence. All right, thank you. All right, the next item is to adopt our agenda. I'll take a motion to adopt. So moved. Second. Motion by Amos, second by Westmoreland. Please open the vote.
The vote is open.
And the agenda is adopted. I believe it'll reflect 5 yeas, 0 nays. I do want to acknowledge that we've been joined by Councilmember Liliana Bakhtiari and Councilmember Destin Hillis. Next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. I'll accept the motion.
So moved.
Moved by Amos, second by Westmoreland. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
The minutes are approved, 6 yeas, 0 nays. The next item is public comment. Just a reminder for our folks out in the audience, you have 3 minutes to address the committee. I will whisper gently into the microphone when you have 30 seconds. I don't want to interrupt what you have to say, but I do want you to be aware of the time, and we'll go from there. So,
Councilmember, I think it would help if you could give everyone an example of what a gentle whisper looks like.
30 seconds. So we'll get right into it. Our first public speaker is, let's see, we're still loading up the list in the system. One moment. Brother Anthony Muhammad, please come to the podium.
King of Kings, known as Negas, Kemetic, indigenous ancestor, antiquity. I command the ancestor to teach my soul consciousness each and every day. And I'm not a believer in the Roman Catholic Church religion, Christianity, in your Bible. From Genesis to Revelation, there is not one person, not one human person born from a woman's womb, Canaan. I come down to talk about homelessness and houses, availability, and of course, I want to go back to Dan Emigadork, a professor at Georgia State University. He spoke about houses, race, and exclusion in the 21st century. Exclusion. You have darker people, Kemetic people, living on the streets, most all over this country, but government is said to start local. Right here in Atlanta, we have this problem. Why is it that you council people is not sensitive enough to the holistic valuation of the Creator and the modern principles of laws, justice, balance, and equality? We have a voice. We have energy that we all are, 99.99% energy, like electricity. If you don't go at electricity in the right way with the right material, you can't get access. But if you go wrong, you could kill yourself. So why is it that you choose not to want to speak out and find ways with the, here in Atlanta, we have control of many buildings. Here in Atlanta, we got control of a lot of properties. We could do something yesterday for the people that are finding themselves out with housing. We gave Tyler Perry 300 acres. We're supposed to have had the opportunity for ones to have access to housing. And we didn't do that. You know, we got you members of this committee. Because even Mr. Westmoreland made comments several times in an article that he had with Atlanta Constitution, $1.3 million in the workforce development going back. We had $4 million of federal grant to train low-skilled workers going back. You members of this committee had a right to speak on behalf of that.
30 seconds.
And Mr. Dozier, I appreciate that little 30 seconds you talk about. I'm not going to be disrespectful because I believe in the spiritual. But the reality is, if you're going to have this Caucasian professor at Georgia State speak on the part of houses raised and exclusion in the 21st century, why don't you? Why don't you members of this committee be more sensitive to the need of the people who have not houses? I'm going to end it like this. Assalamu alaikum, Mayat, Hotep, Ashe, and Ashe. So it is.
Thank you, Brother Muhammad. Our next speaker is Loretta Green.
Good evening. I have been a resident of the Greenbrier Camden Road area and a homeowner since 1974, so I guess I'm a legacy resident. I am here to oppose the dissolving of our MPUR and support the legislation by Ms. Overstreet and Ms. Boone. When Ms. LaRue presented the plan to the city, to our community, I wrote her a letter following, and I copied the city council, but I would like to read you my thoughts on this matter. Ms. LaRue, I have been involved with NPR since its beginning in the 70s. The late Maynard Jackson saw a way to give citizens a voice in the city development process. What happened at NPUR meeting last week was an insult to the community and to the late Mr. Jackson. The planning department's solution to dealing with concerns about the previous election is to dissolve NPUR rather than to deal with the problem under the pretense that the planning department is looking to realign all the MPUs. No one believes this. When asked how NPR was chosen to be the first, you did not give me an answer. The previous major issues of our MPU has been certain people disrupting the meeting. This was addressed by Mr. Sims years ago, and that person was banned by the planning department, no one else, and the people started coming back to the meeting. One of the issues we have now is the election of the present administration, I believe was done by 6 members. Also, Mr. Dobbs has not allowed members to participate or be on committees and said they are not in good standing. There's nothing in the bylaws that allow him to do this. You have received numerous complaints that have been ignored. One of the people not allowed to speak is Mr. Vincent Ford, who is here today, who has worked in this community for many years. What has been accomplished under the present administration? There have been several new developments in the area this year that was negotiated under the previous Land Use Committee. We have numerous community organizations that have worked together for decades, and under this plan, this community will be divided. People in the Camden Road area will be separated into several MPUs. And what I'm asking is that we have another election officiated by the planning committee that will allow those that was not included in the 2021 election be allowed to vote in a new election process. Please do not dissolve our NPUR. We need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Our next speaker is Senator Vincent Fort, who I just saw.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you, Ms. Green, for that reference. One, I was APAT president for 2 years and vice president for a year, but I also represented the Campbellton Road area in my senatorial district for the parts of 21 years. And I have attended those meetings going back to when Mr. Sims, Barney Sims, was chair. So I have some authority to speak on this issue. While Ms. Green is right, there have been disruptive behavior in that MPU for a long time. But even after that one person got a 1-year suspension, the disruptive behavior continued. I have visited every MPU in the city at one time or the other, and I've seen some heated combat, and I participated in some of that heated combat, but I have never seen in my life the kind of disruption. It got to the point where one person had a restraining order applied against them, and the city did what? Nothing. Okay? So that is the state of chaos that was in PUR. Now we're told that the MPU has to be reformed. Why is it after all this time that the city has what I will tell you, what I have termed active neglect? Why is the city so interested in reforming MPUR? By the way, she's right. Maynard created it, but it was a council member from District 1 45 years ago, and I'm having my senior moment, that on council that carried the legislation. So we need to make sure that history is known. But why is the city so hell-bent on reforming MPUR, reforming, and I put that in air quotes? They are hell-bent on it because in the last year or two, people like Ansonetta Robinson and Miss Green and others have stood up and said, no, we don't want to be shortchanged when it comes to bus rapid transit versus light rail. We have stood up against the proliferation of beer and wine convenience stores.
30 seconds.
And there is, I know, and you can read, I emailed all of you late last night an email, but there is I know developers are salivating at getting hold to that, like the old folks say, getting hold to that money that's coming to Campbellton Road. And instead of having folk who stand up and fight back, there's a belief that destroying MPUR will keep us quiet. Let me tell you this, I'm gonna speak up and speak out, speak truth to justice no matter when or where. But to do this to MPUR, I think, because you wanna squash input. I can't even speak in the MPU meeting. Ms. Robinson can't speak in the MPU meeting. Ms. Corliss Clare cannot speak in the MPU meeting. If you're going to reform the MPU, make it democratic for everybody. Thank you. I'm sorry I ran over. I know. I appreciate you, brother.
Thank you, Senator Fort. All right. Next, we have.
The other thing I'm going to say, watch my Facebook page. I'm going to do a post on transit racism, a history of transit racism in the city of Atlanta. It exists until this very hour. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. All right, our next speaker is Henry Kahn.
And Senator Fort,
Oh, sorry.
you spoke of the late Alderman and former City Councilman John H. Calhoun from District 1. So just want to let you know that.
All right, Henry Kahn. So yes, we can do that. However, Ms. McIntosh, or Dr. McIntosh, you're not on the speaking list for another maybe 5 or 6 speakers. So we'll get that worked out with the count. And so I'll go through the next line, and then when it's time for you to come up, we'll have that yielded time added to you. All right, Ms. Robinson, Anthony Robinson.
Good afternoon, council members. Always good to see you. I'm going to read a brief statement. Over the last year, many of us have been subjected to voter suppression and the silencing of our voices by the current NPUR chair, Donovan Dodds. Upon review of his September 27, 2022 communication to council yesterday, it seems unbridled ambition ushered in a cooler head for Mr. Dodds. We find that interesting. Despite NPUR's extremely toxic environment over the last year, the neighborhoods and communities within ours stood shoulder to shoulder and continued the following work. We work with developers to ensure that they give back at least a fraction of what they will receive from building in our community. We work to create green spaces, identified a new park, and connectivity for trails that will connect Southwest Atlanta to the Northwest Quadrant and to towns south of the city limits. We wrote a Campbellton Road overlay that promotes design continuity, making our voices heard about ill-placed gas stations and vaporized LRT promises. And we also, most importantly, continue our support for the Cascade Business Corridor, a collection of African-American businesses, as most of you know. In short, the workhorses whose names you all know will continue to work regardless of whether they are assigned to Q, S, or P. But in this ordinance, you have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to create positive change, positive system-wide change. As written, the ordinance does not speak to details that this 40-year-old community system lacks. And that is where our community leaders have found the devil's lurking, the lack of details. The NPU system needs a champion. It needs a real sponsor who has a vision in it of being more than it is. Everything can be improved. When it was created, we didn't have 911. Firefighters only fought fires. They didn't do EMT. And I do believe it was only 30 years ago that Bill Campbell expanded council. You didn't have as many council members. Everything can be reimagined and revisited. If you change R, deplete R, whatever you're going to do, make sure that your changes are system-wide and that they work for every single NPU. And Senator Ford spoke about the protective order. As chair of NPUR, Councilman Winston, Bakhtiari, Amos, Dozier, you weren't elected. It was me. I was assaulted at an NPU meeting. And the only recourse I had, because it's NPU, and it's y'all's police force, it's NPU. They decided to take a step back. And the only recourse I had was to get a protective order against that individual. That's the kind of reform we need. There is nothing written that says public service, volunteer public service has to put your life and limb in danger. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Our next speaker is David Getachew Smith. Apologies if I mispronounced your last name.
Good afternoon. It's David Getachew Smith for the record. I'm the former chair of NPU-Q and a former board member of Regency Park Homeowners Association. I'm here today in support of the legislation proposed by Councilperson Overstreet and supported by other council members as well as those that represent at large. My support is based upon the failure of the planning proposal to provide adequate involvement or notice to rank and file Atlanta citizens and to sufficiently provide notice and consultation with affected elected officials. The planning proposal fails to recognize long-established unique bonds of community identity. Rather, the goal appears to be to target one section of the city in retaliation against one NPU deemed unmanageable by planning. Curiously, the proposal solution is to abolish one entire NPU and to cast its pieces to other NPUs for proper management. This precedent is disturbing and could have citywide ramifications. The NPU system was established by Maynard Jackson at the time when the presiding officer of the City Council was Marvin Arrington. And I worked as an intern as well as in the campaign staff for Maynard Jackson, and I was the first law clerk for President Arrington, and also if you read his biography, I wrote the foreword to that book. And I am sure that they would find this planning proposal, which we have been informed does not require the approval of the NPUs, APAB, the affected city council persons, or city council, to be alarming and counter to their efforts to break down city government to promote citizen input, access, and protection from bureaucratic domination. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Henry Jordan. Ms. Jordan.
Giving honor to Spirit of God to everyone that's here. Thus said the Lord, cursed be the man that trusteth in man, and maketh flesh his arm, and whose heart departed from the Lord. Jeremiah 17, chapter 5th verse. He observes that they say, or lean on horses and trust in chariots, rather than God, who is a spirit. To trust in your artillery cannot save you like Jesus can. James Griffiths asked him for Jesus to curse him. Receive us when we have wronged no man, when we have corrupted no man, when we have defrauded no man. 2 Corinthians 7:2. I ask Jesus, can you create income without deceit, defraud, lying, robbery, treachery, mischief, etc.? What you have set up and is to promote these actions that work against the righteous word of Christ. So how can income be created? Or how can I work with you? None calleth for justice. None or any pleaded for truth. They trust in vanity and speak lies. They conceive mischief and bring forth iniquity. Isaiah 59, chapter 4th verse. God's hand is not yet beyond the reach of salvation, but their sin separated them from his presence. Jesus created the income for me to work for him only, when those who desire to please him will benefit. Sinners will benefit, but it is Christ's desire for them to seek to live holy. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5th chapter 19th verse. Because of the necessity of righteousness as a requirement to enter to heaven, Jesus then declares, except their righteousness exceed the scribes and the Pharisees, they cannot enter into heaven. I must seek to have a Christ-like atmosphere to work when and where God says to work. Jesus don't need your help, and it's so definite you need his. Thou shalt not steal, Exodus 20th chapter 15 verse. If you break this commandment and teach men so, ye consider least in the kingdom of heaven. Your law didn't create the income. Jesus' word did. Your law can't deliver like Christ can. So he's told me a protection plan for his people. You can't deliver yourself like Jesus Christ can, no matter what law you got.
Thank you, Ms. Jordan. Next we have Renette Scott. Renette L. Scott.
Good afternoon. I am not in support of 22-0-1747 as currently written. I am in support of this statement from the collective voices of 10 neighborhoods within NPUR. I quote, as currently within the As currently written, the amendment gives council authority for the first time in 47 years to review the Department of City Planning's recommendations for change.
Ms. Scott, if you could put the microphone in front. Yeah, thank you.
Better? Sorry. That's strange to me. Department of City Planning's recommendations to changes to NPU boundaries. Council must go further and add the glaringly missing details around when and how redesignations are to occur, end quote. In addition, the City Council must strengthen those areas within NPU structure to ensure the vision of the NPU after years of engagement can be truly realized. It is of utmost importance that conversations with all stakeholders begin now and need to continue until equitable resolution is reached. Now, I'm saying that because I'm in agreement with all the previous speakers in relation to the NPU and how it has ended in its relationship with the citizens, especially within NPUR, which I can attest to firsthand. I'm a resident of Atlanta, born. 35 years on the south side where I am now, and several years as past chair of NPUR Land Use Zoning Committee. This is the first year that I have not been able to speak in NPU meetings. We work very hard, legacy groups, neighborhoods, leaders work very hard on an overlay with Councilman Ogletree and other community members. We work very hard to address various issues. In fact, developing a relationship with all the developers that had come before the NPU prior to this year through liaison teams that work and communicate with the developers on behalf of the community. If you chime into NPR meetings, it's like everything is humpty-dory, everything's fine. There's nothing going on except reports from the city people with no essence to it of any sort. There needs to be a change in the structure. I don't want to go over the ills of the NPU specific but it proves that there is a problem with the system. And to have people come in and disrupt
Thank you, Ms. Scott.
and not be able to have a meeting. Council meeting is what we've been told to resolve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Council the meeting if you can't get people to stop being disruptive. That ends up not having meetings, and that happened for a year. And now we have this. Resolution is not it, but if it is, we need to make sure that we all have a voice in this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Corliss Clare.
Good evening. It's been a really long time since I've seen some of you. Byron, probably well over a decade. Matt, you're looking different. I think everyone has given, I'm sorry, got to add a little bit of levity. I think everyone has been very effective with giving their views. I will just reaffirm some things. You have information packets in front of you, one of which is a statement from 10 of our 11 communities, from leadership in 10 of our 11 communities. We lost a member in number 11 community recently. We're not in agreement with the legislation as written that reviews the redesignations of NPU boundaries. And the reason that we aren't is because it simply just doesn't go far enough. If you're going to say you want to volunteer to direct traffic, there needs to be some rules of the road with it as well. So if you would go back and add that, I think that that would be very helpful. The other thing is that sometimes change comes up in really strange forms. What has happened in introducing potential change with the MPU was definitely head spinning. But after our heads stopped spinning, and we tried to take a little bit of time and assess what was being presented, and think about what the possibilities may be for looking at change. Not saying the change as presented, but what we're saying is taking time to look at the possibilities of change. There's been no major changes in 47 years. That's back when I was still going to the clubs and having a nice time. It's time to look at change, and we don't have to be terrified of it. We simply don't. And for the suspicions and the angles, there are many truths in this. Many things are true at the same time. But it doesn't mean that we should stop or will be willing to stop taking a good, hard look
30 seconds.
at perhaps how we can work more effectively in the Campbellton corridor, dismissing the expressways that divide us, how we can work better with the Cascade corridor. So we anticipate and we will go forward with conversation, and we expect nothing but the best support and the best that you all have to give with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Claire. All right, next we have, let me go back to my list. Doesn't want to pull up the full name. Dr. McIntosh, I think did I say your last name correctly? I'm sorry. McIntosh. I only see your first name on my list. I was wanting to not mess that up. And before we start, was it just the one person that was going to yield time? Can I get those names so that because we have a list of people who are signed in, so I want to make sure that's reflected. If you could state your name. So the other piece I do want to share is that per city code for committee meetings, there's a cap on the amount of public speaking time, so it's 10 minutes. So, okay, so I just wanted to be clear on that front. So if you could say the names who are all yielding time so that we can reflect.
All yielding time? Betty Jo Steele.
Okay.
Obi Terwilliger and Jack. Yeah. And Jack Bernard.
I'm Toby Terwilliger. I would like to yield my time to Edith, actually.
All right, so let's unpack that just a little bit real quick. So Henry Kahn, I have listed BJ Steele are both going to yield time to you. And then Toby Terwilliger is yielding time to Ms. Platypo. Is that? Okay.
Jack Bernard is yielding time.
So Mr. Bernard, I don't have signed up for public comment, so we can't yield time if he's not.
He signed up. He may have missed the time cutoff. There was a line. It's okay. We're good.
Okay. Well, are we? Okay. All right. Dr. McIntosh.
I won't need 9. Thank you so much. So my name is Belinda McIntosh, and I'm a psychiatrist, and I've been practicing in Atlanta for over 15 years. And I came here today to try to call on the City Council and this committee to amplify the voices of so many in our community and in America who lack access to health care or are dissatisfied with their health care, and to call on this committee and the council to act quickly to urge Congress to pass the Medicare for All Act of 2021. I have since learned that the council has, and you can confirm for me, the council has passed this resolution unanimously.
It was on the consent agenda last week, yes.
And was passed. And so just gonna not take too much time, but just sort of pivot to thanking the council for this action. And so I thank you on behalf of physicians who spend countless hours on the phone fighting with insurance companies to help their patients get the care that they need, and watch them still struggle to pay for it. I thank you on behalf of patients who struggle to get their appropriate medical care and preventive services at a reasonable cost. I thank you on behalf of physicians who work in public healthcare systems and private healthcare systems here in Atlanta. We're representing Grady, Emory, the VA, who daily watch the encroachment of health management corporations into medical decision-making. I thank you on behalf of private practice physicians and small business owners, including some who have pre-existing conditions and struggle to gain access to appropriate healthcare coverage for themselves, for their families, and for their employees. I thank you because from every vantage point, as a patient, provider, and a small business owner myself, I see every day how for-profit corporations, insurance companies, fail to provide adequate access and coverage for the vital healthcare services that we need. And I thank you for supporting this resolution in support of Medicare for All, because we cannot count on corporations to provide reasonable health care at a reasonable cost for the majority of people. It's simply not what corporations are about. Corporations are about profits. And so those needing health care will continue to suffer. And so I thank you today, and I ask you to call on us, the members of our organization, Physicians for a National Health Program, to provide any support that you need to amplify this call beyond City Council. And I thank you for joining many other cities and councils in a grassroots movement to bring this to the attention of our leaders at all levels so that we can pass a universal comprehensive health care plan for all Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McIntosh. Recognizing that I believe both the next two speakers have yielded time to various other parties, I believe our next speaker is Mr. Ron Shakir.
Ron Shakir, beautiful, Southwest Atlanta. Let me just start by saying I have my little notes. I hope I'll be able to get through it. But I'm in support of what everybody has basically said, except going through the details and the weeds. And I'm suspect of that, and I hope we pay attention to that, because those regimes that has been oppressive to people at NPUR now is coming to stand that they have been put on the firing line, shot down, and not able to speak. So I'm glad to see them now, because their future have been one to shut down the system that Maynard Jackson wanted to put into play. And what he wanted to put in was the fact, coming out of a Jim Crow environment, that African Americans will feel comfortable and have a system that they can depend on elected officials, and not just depend on elected officials, but depend on the voices from the community to impress and have them to do what they're supposed to do as for all citizens of the city of Atlanta coming out of Jim Crow. So I welcome them to it. But we have to open our eyes and realize that it's been votes about the Fort McPherson that this same group refused or wasn't excited or wasn't concerned about getting a report. Well, it was one man who was. His name was Mr. Howard, and we thank God for him. And anybody of former elected officials who tried to put a bad name on Mr. Howard, he is a man who speaks of the process. He don't have to win, but he's gonna demand that you be able to engage in the process of this great democracy with all its flaws. I just wanted to say that community development should be very concerned about hospitals in Atlanta who's inviting the world to come to Atlanta, don't have or voting against level 1 hospitals and seeing them closed and threat of even more than being closed. We should do more to protect public engagement. More legislation with less engagement is against the best interests of all our communities. How can we be more focused on trails opposed to the citizen lives in our community? The work engine of Atlanta NPUs is now being ran by a young man named Dobbs. Well, he got his training in support of this group.
30 seconds.
And I support this group this time, but I don't want them to think we want to support being blind. We want to have our voices the way Maynard Jackson designed. Fort Mac, the board, less, very good, smarter, allow. I say that we think that right now God has allowed what Miss Overstreet and some of y'all have signed out on, you know what I'm saying, to suppress and make leeway to a person who's supposed to be she's supposed to be a scheduler. We don't even have a design dedicated planner yet, and we want to go along with her. This group, I'm with them today, but not with them in the past, because they have shot down a lot of people in this fake thing about being able to approach. And this warrant you have out of Ms. Howard is illegitimate, is wrong-spirited, and they've been some tough cookies. We appreciate them coming on the right side, but we're going to hold Ms. Overstreet accountable.
Thank you, Mr. Shakir.
And we appreciate all the good you can do, because this was the lowest turnout in political history of y'all being elected. So we're going to hope that y'all do the right thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shakir. All right. Our next speaker, Ms. Edith Platypo. And Ms. Platypo, since you were yielded time, I believe you have 6 minutes.
Had an accident, so I'm a little slow. I want to tell you just a little bit about me. I was the second president of NPUR. I was reelected 5 times for a reason. I was elected to the Atlanta Planning and Advisory Board unanimously. I served in that capacity for 2 terms. I served in one of the most difficult periods in Atlanta was when we were paying $10,000 a day for fines from EPA. And it was the citizens that came together on the Atlanta Planning and Advisory Board that met with Dr. Clef that changed the direction of the way in which the city of Atlanta was going to pay for that and still do what they wanted to do. And so I stand on the grounds of Mr. Calhoun. He was my mentor. He was the person that taught me the reason why the NPU was absolutely necessary. After Mr. Calhoun was born in 1889, he had seen a lot of racism, a lot of hangings, a lot of segregation, and a lot of times when we had to drink from different faucets. He was a committed man, very committed. And he wrote me a letter and asked me if he could be my mentor. You know, and so I had him for about 10 years before he passed away. So when I hear somebody talk about, you know, closing down of communities, it disturbs me a great deal, because all of you that look like me, you're there because of him. Not because you're so intelligent or so beautiful or whatever. You're there because of him. Now, the one thing that I want to say about this piece of legislation is I like the concept, but that's about all. Because if you look at it at the top, it is not an ordinance. It's not binding by law. It is it says R up there. What's that mean? I'd suggest that you find out the difference. The other thing is I went back and I looked at all the maps I had of NPUR. So nice, so clean, so smooth, very organized. Then I looked at the one that they turned in to us last week. Compare. No comparison. So I am asking Ms. Overstreet to go back and do a little bit more work. And I'm going to tell you why. There is a big difference between a resolution and an ordinance. The resolution is not binding by law. The second thing I want to say is that I do not believe even in this concept, because first of all, it denied due process to us, the people that are going to be affected. It did not comply with the intent of the law. Citizens are supposed to be able to decide for themselves what their community looks like. This is not what this ordinance is about. And mainly for me, as an investigator and a civil rights person and an employee of civil rights office, it's a violation of my civil rights. It does not allow African Americans to decide what happens in their community. So I don't know what the city is going to do about that, because you haven't touched Buckhead, you haven't touched Midtown, none of those areas. But yet you come to the black community and now you want to just obliterate it and say, well done. As you also know, under Title VI, under the federal government, every department with every new president is given an edict. Everybody must comply. So if you think that you can go over here in HUD and get this, and go over here in the Department of Transportation and get something else, you're mistaken. Because every department is under the same federal law. And if you're not in compliance with the HUD order, you're not going to be in compliance with Title V, the Civil Rights Act. The other thing is that, let me put my glasses on so I can see. The NPU system has worked very successfully for a number of years. I know some of you will be surprised to know that NPUR created the first citywide development plan. We allowed Buckhead to use the plan that we had, but we did it. And all of the things that I am saying here to you today, I'm going to put them in writing for you so that you know what you're out of compliance with, and so you know how much work you really need to do before you pass anything. So I would recommend that you hold this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Platypo. Real quick, since I know you addressed Councilmember Overstreet directly, I'll give her an
So I
opportunity
wanted
say
to just clarify a couple things. Thank you so much for coming in to speak today. I really do appreciate your advocacy, just in general, whether we agree on topics or not. Same for you, Mr. Shakir. But the ordinance, it is an ordinance. The paper that I have on today is an ordinance. There is a resolution also that has my name on it, but it is sponsored by Councilmember Boone. During our legislative time, I will be speaking on both of those, but it is an ordinance. And just so Mr. Shakir knows, it is actually stating that I am not in, I don't agree with city planning, the process for the NPU changes right now. So I'm not sure where the where the mistake happened, but I'm not in support of it, and that's what the legislation states. And it is actually an ordinance, because it needs to be an ordinance.
Well,
like
I
you
would
stated.
just say this to that. I read everything that I was given.
Okay.
Some of the information has the wrong signature. The one that I saw last week had 16 signatures on it. This one, new legislation only has 4, so I don't know if they left a page out or what.
Oh.
But all I'm saying is that it still needs a lot of work.
So let me just talk, well, of course, but this legislation is only supposed to do one thing, and I am going to go into those details, but I want to make sure we're talking about the same legislation, because you said it was an ordinance. I just want to be clear. It's 22-0-1747.
That's not the ones that I have gotten.
Okay.
And I've been down here 3 times asking for the legislation. and
Okay. Well,
that's what I've gotten.
So I have a copy of it. I'll give it to you.
Okay, great.
All right, thanks.
All right, thank you. Our next speaker is Lynette Grant.
Good afternoon. I am so happy to be here because I usually don't go to these meetings, but I'm going to attend more of them because I am concerned about my city. I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, in Summer Hill. I moved in this neighborhood in 1981. I've seen a lot of changes. Now, I want to speak on two things. First, the homeless, and then next, my deep concerns regarding current NPU issues. NPUR is where I currently live. Homeless people need housing committee members. The city of Atlanta has so many empty buildings all over, and I've seen them just riding around in this town. I wonder, why can't we do something with these buildings that could be used to create good housing options for the homeless who honestly want it? As a retired licensed social worker, having worked in the field 34 years, and I worked for Travelers Aid of Metro Atlanta on the United Way, and I'm sure y'all have heard of that one, dealing with the homeless. I am sensitive to the homeless population even today. And I strongly feel that the city of Atlanta and this committee should do something to help homeless people move from the streets into homes. I am real serious about this, you all. We should not have all these homeless people and then they all piled up around City Hall, making it look nasty and filthy downtown. Something needs to be done about that. Now, the next thing I want to speak of, NPU dissolvement. No, this is not an option. It is apparent to me that we need a new chair over NPUR. The Greenbrier Corridor and surrounding neighborhoods needs good and family-friendly developments. Infrastructure repairs needed badly. Campbellton Road and Cascade Roads are bumpy as, I ain't gonna say the bad word, and y'all know it. Miss Oak Street, I hope you know it. NPU really needs support of our council person to help us with ways to build up the entire operation of NPUR and create more community input. We don't have enough input. What we want to see, I was very, very disappointed with the city letting that gas station go up at Harbin Road and Campbell Road. We don't need no more gas stations. We've got enough of those in the community. We need some good businesses, some grocery stores, some drug stores. I'm saying what I need to say now, y'all, because it's been held back in my voice too long, so I have to say it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grant. Our final speaker is Ms. Muna Muhammad. You're good.
Good afternoon. My name is Mona Muhammad. I'm 26 years old, and I'm from the Southwest Atlanta area. In particular, I guess the area that everyone's talking about. After graduating college, I did open up a business inside of Greenbrier Mall, and last Friday marked 3.5 years that I've been inside of there. It is true that there needs to be infrastructure work and redevelopment throughout the community. I did not budge into it. I stayed true to myself, but there are a lot of people that actually make it all the way to Greenbrier Mall would call me and say, "Are you sure you're in here?" And they would not actually come in. And based off their voice, I know they're not like the people that live in the community. No type of community development has really been done on the Campbellton corridor my whole life. A lot of people seem to talk about, oh, Cascade. Cascade is such a different world when you look at Campbellton Road. Cascade has so many resources such as convenience stores, grocery stores, lights, sidewalks. They have so much, but Campbellton has nothing. And that is a big issue for me, because why are we gloating about what one has and not really focusing on what one doesn't have? If you look into the community and the median household income for the community in 1970, the same median income is the same that it is today when you do the money conversion. In 1970s is when integration happened and many Black people moved into the community. And since then, there has not been any growth besides the legacy people that built the community, which is great for them, but what about my generation? There's nothing built on Campbellton Road for us, and I'm gonna play my part, and, you know, build a business, talk about what's wrong, but we need the help from those on the other side of the table like you guys. They did talk about the homeless issue. My whole life, I've never seen homeless people in my community, but now I'm seeing one too many of them where they're sleeping at bus stops and they're taking away the seats at the bus stops. That's not a solution. That's just making them go somewhere else, but they're still in the community. The gas station that just got built next to Mount Carmel Church, that is a big issue because why are there so many gas stations there, but yet it's the second most used bus route? They're building it for the convenience store, as in the money that the convenience that there is. There are no grocery stores within the Campbellton Road. There is one on Greenbrier Parkway, but none on Campbellton Road. That's a big issue. Affordable housing, I've heard that you guys can't really do anything about it. It's a state law that prevents it. There's so much wrong in our community, and I would hope that you guys can develop it with many things that we do need, such as better shopping things. I am inside of the mall, but I've seen 2 department stores leave. There's nothing in the mall for the community to shop at, grocery stores. There's no drugstores on Campbellton Road. There's a gas station that has a drugstore. Why can't we get our pharmacy needs from a pharmacy store? No health care. You can't really get urgent care or anything on Campbellton. But there's many issues they seem to touch on, and I guess I'll be touching on it in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Muhammad.
Thank you, guys.
All right, and thank you to all of our speakers today. Before we move into the rest of the agenda, I do want to acknowledge a couple things. One, I think that we, as a council, heard you all loud and clear, not only today, but in your messaging and your communication. Community Development Human Services Committee will be hosting a work session on the topic of the MPU boundary redraw. It will be held on October 27th at 9:30 a.m. That's a Thursday, so a month from today. I will add that recognizing that there's a lot of interest and excitement about this issue, we actually are going to have that work session held in the City Council chambers since there's more space in there. I recognize that there will be a lot of communication with your constituents and with your community members. So we want to make sure there's space available for everyone, but that will be October 27th, 9:30 a.m. in the City Council chambers, number one. Number two, I did speak with the administration today and the Department of City Planning today. I do know that they are putting a pause on the Southwest Strong, the name escapes me right now, but that plan, which includes the boundary redraw for MPUR, they are putting a pause on that and are going to regroup to have a more comprehensive strategy around what does or should that look like. Either way, we're still going to hold that work session because they could have that regrouping done before the work session is done. So what has been discussed with you all as of late is bound to change. So be on the lookout for more details with regards to that. But I did want to acknowledge those 2 pieces. The last thing I do want to say to that, I know Janae Prince, our new Commissioner of the Department of City Planning, was here earlier, so I wanted to acknowledge that she was here with us and listen to you all as she meets with council members and she goes through her confirmation process. I imagine we will be sure to get her thoughts about this process and where she sees this process going. So just wanted to acknowledge those 3 pieces before we move into the rest of the agenda. But thank you all so much for your advocacy and your passion about this very important topic. Before we move into presentations, I do recognize that we have one communication. We have an individual that is here for a potential appointment. So if my colleagues would do me the honor, I would like to move that ahead of presentations on the agenda. Seeing no issues, we go ahead and move with that communication.
Item number 23 is 22C5144, a communication from council members Howard Shook, District 7, Mary Norwood, District 8, and Matt Westmoreland, Post 2 at large, appointing Mr. Michael Golden to serve as a member of the Atlanta Urban Design Commission in the lawyer category. This appointment is for a term of 3 years.
Thank you. Mr. Golden, if you could tell the committee a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in this appointment.
Thank you for moving me ahead of the agenda, council members. I'm 58 years old, except for the 7 years that I went to college and law school. I've lived my entire life in the city limits within about a 5-mile radius. Frankly, I didn't seek this position, but Councilmember Norwood asked me to serve, and so I'm observing her wish. But I am interested in the position. I care about the community I live in. I'm not anti-development, but I do think there should be sort of some conscious regard for what the restrictions are on what you can do. And I've spoken to the chairman of the Urban Design Commission and vetted with him that my background would be helpful. And I'm at a point in my career and in my life where I have the somewhat control over my schedule that I can give it the time that it deserves.
Thank you, Mr. Golden. Any questions or comments from colleagues? All right, we have a motion to approve by Westmoreland, a second by Winston. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
All right, the motion is accepted, 4 yeas, 0 nays. Congratulations, and thank you for your service to the city of Atlanta.
Thank you.
All right, next item, presentations. We have Clyde Higgs with Atlanta Beltline Incorporated.
Thank you very much, Chairman Dozier. As you mentioned, my name is Clyde Higgs, and I'm the President and CEO for Atlanta Beltline, Inc., and I also want to acknowledge my colleague, Jill Johnson, who heads up government affairs for the Beltline. A lot of nice things to report with regards to the Beltline. This is probably not foreign to you, but definitely some exciting times for Beltline. And if you can go to slide 3, please, that would be great. Or maybe I can do that. All right, so after a long wait, we are super excited to announce that we have selected, in partnership with the community, a finalist for Murphy's Crossing. So for those that don't have the history here, so Murphy's Crossing is roughly a 20-acre site right off the west side trail of the Beltline. And so we have selected a group out of Arizona named Cul-de-sac. And Cul-de-sac is also partnering with Urban Oasis, T. Dallas Smith and Kronberg, and just a number of other organizations to reimagine what this 20-acre site could be, with an emphasis on density and affordability within the Oakland City, Adair Park, and Capitol View community. So this is very exciting. They are a finalist for us. This is a project, it's not over the finish line yet. There will be a number of community conversations with Cul-de-sac and Urban Oasis just to make sure that they are perfecting their project, and ultimately the opportunities to get entitlements is going to be a part of the discussion. But we are super excited about this milestone that we've reached, again, in partnership with the community. And just real quick, about 3 weeks ago, we had State of the Beltline. So this is something that we host on an annual basis in partnership with the Council for Quality Growth. And we had a really good showing. We had, I guess, roughly 170 people that showed up physically for that meeting. Then we had another 120 people online viewing State of the Beltline. And this is a place where we come together and share kind of the latest and greatest with regards to the Beltline project. But I will say that the highlight of State of the Beltline was definitely when the founder of Grady Babies gave his comments about a program that he recently got involved with, and this is the Beltline Marketplace program, and really talked about how this program is going to just change just the trajectory of his family and his life. And I don't think that there was one dry eye in this audience when he told his story and kind of what this was going to mean specifically for his family. And what we talked about at State of the Beltline, and this was a significant headline for us, and it's almost unimaginable to be able to say this, but with regards to the trail, so within the next 2 years, we're going to have over 80% of the Beltline under construction or completed within the next 24 months. I will tell you, the last time I was here talking to you, I could not say that with confidence. And you may remember that was the whole reason why we had the debate about the SSD and the opportunity for philanthropic funds. Now we actually have line of sight to being able to finish the Beltline Trail specifically by the end of 2030. So some really significant headways there. And then I will talk just briefly about some of the trail updates here, and you all have probably heard a lot about this, but this is the Northwest Trail. So we went to the community again roughly about 3 weeks ago to talk about the priority alignment for the northwest segment of the Beltline. And for those that don't know, this is roughly about 4.5 miles of mainline Beltline in what I describe as 9 to 12 on the clock dial. And there was a lot of discussion about specifically one segment of this portion of the mainline trail, and that was for us to go the Bennett Street. We also had 2 other options there, and ultimately we decided that the Bennett Street segment or alignment would be the priority for us. And so we had this conversation with the community, and a lot of the feedback from the community was really pushing us to go this route. We needed to do some of our own internal due diligence to make sure that we were not going to displace any of the businesses that were along that corridor. But this is definitely the alignment that the community wanted us to push forward with. And then real quickly on the Northeast Trail, you may remember roughly 2 years ago that the Georgia Power organization donated funds for us to complete a segment of the Beltline. We call it the Hairpin Line. And so we're in the throes of completing roughly 1.25 miles on the northeastern segment of the Beltline. And you can see some of the photos here. We hope to finish that project within the next 18 months. And then real quick on the east side, you may not know this, but a part of the Beltline responsibilities is to advance complete streets. Where are places in the community that we can create connectivity with a focus on pedestrians and cyclists? And so we are in the throes of finishing a project that is roughly 2/3 of a mile of finishing off State Route 8, probably known to you as Ponce de Leon. And so we're in the throes of that, and we hope to finish that by the first quarter of 2024. And then a part that I am just personally excited about, and this is on the South Side Trail. So one of the things that we say about the South Side Trail, this is the game-changing segment of the Beltline, because ultimately this is going to connect the East Side Trail to the West Side Trail. And so we were happy to announce that we put out an invitation to bid for segments 4 and 5 of the South Side Trail of the Beltline. And once we start construction, we hope that should be completed within 24 months of construction. And I think Councilmember Amos and also Councilmember Hillis will be really excited about this. But we are substantially complete with the West Side Trail Segment 3. We actually hope to host not a groundbreaking, but a ribbon cutting for this segment on October 18th. And so if your schedule allows, come be with us on that morning at 10 o'clock on October 18th to celebrate the completion of that project. And then on segment 4 of the West Side Trail, we are in the throes of design for that. We are completing some of the remaining real estate items that we need to finish off there, but that project from construction will also take roughly 18 to 24 months for that to be completed. And then the program that I mentioned a little bit earlier, the Beltline Marketplace. And you may have read about this in some of the headlines, but the Condita Foundation was very generous in advancing about $750,000 to help support a program that many will describe as really the Beltline's first small business incubator program. We call it Beltline Marketplace to really address affordability along the Beltline. I think we oftentimes talk about residential affordability, and that is key, that is important, but also the opportunities for businesses to thrive specifically on the Beltline. It is the high rent district. And so what can we do from a city perspective, from a Beltline perspective, to really create a place for these entrepreneurs of color to really benefit from the Beltline investment. And so I guess it was on August 20th, we actually had a block party, and so several of the Congress, the city council members came out to support that program. And I'm going to stop here real quick, and if we can just open up the video, I would love just to show you a quick video of Beltline Marketplace. Beltline Marketplace, at the end of the day, is a really specific program where businesses can operate literally on the Beltline. This is the next wave of conversation that we should be having within our great city is commercial affordability.
Partnering with the Atlanta Beltline to create the Beltline Marketplace is how we are thinking about upward mobility. It positions the Village Market and the Atlanta Beltline to be an answer, to be a solution to a problem of placement and displacement. People's lives are going to change because of this partnership. And what we know to be true, customers are on the Beltline. So we can bet that this is going to work, but it's going to require thoughtful programming, which we're going to do, thoughtful partners, which we have in place, and entrepreneurs that are ready, and we're going to ensure that they're ready.
And we can see a business that started or that was being incubated in the Beltline Marketplace, and then all of a sudden they have 100 employees in 2030. That's the type of legacy that we're going to be excited about, because we are helping people to drive wealth into their household. All right, thank you for sharing that. And again, just from a legacy perspective, and as we think about 2030 and the completion of the Beltline Loop, that is going to be one of the things that we are most proud of, is really standing up that opportunity to build wealth in communities that don't always have direct access to some of these investments. So that is absolutely going to pay off. We are still in pilot phase mode, and so we're still working out some of the kinks there, but the hope is that we can grow that program around the whole 22-mile loop of the Beltline. And just real quick on the affordability side, we have been very busy along with our partners at Atlanta Housing, Invest Atlanta, and also the commercial development world in really advancing affordability across the Beltline Loop. And so what you'll see here is there is a development in the Oakland City neighborhood, 1055 Arden, where there's going to be, roughly 48 affordable units. Some of those will also be supportive housing as well. And I'm really excited about this one specifically because it is near an Oakland City MARTA stop. And just real quick, this is our scorecard for Beltline. The promise from an affordability standpoint is that we advance the preservation or new unit production of 5,600 units of affordable housing. Today, we are roughly at 3,100 units that have been created or preserved along the Beltline tax allocation district. And then there's been an additional 1,700 units that have been created just generally close to the Beltline. We describe that as the Beltline planning area. And again, and this is our scorecard. So we roughly have about 2,400 units to go. The goal is to beat or exceed that 2,400 unit count by the end of 2030. We are on schedule, and even for 2022, just to give you some numbers, our goal was to do 320 units. We are roughly at 400 units for this calendar year. And we have another deal in our pipeline. If it closes, that means that we will beat our annual goal by 40%. And this is not to suggest that we don't have more work that needs to be done, but it's definitely going in the right direction because of our partners that are helping us to advance affordability on the Beltline. And this just gives you a visual representation of our pipeline and where are those developments located. And you can see there is a significant focus on the south side portion of the Beltline. And what you will see in the future is you can see this dot at the very top, kind of the turquoise color. That is the Garson property that we own. So not only did we produce those number of units, but we have over the last year and a half essentially tripled our land for housing affordability over the last 18 months or so. And so that is key. That is going to provide benefits for the long-term health of our city. But this Garson opportunity is going to be what you see come out of the ground per se with regards to the next Beltline affordable housing development. And then we were also happy to support the city and MARTA with regards to having a community conversation about future Beltline transit. We are at roughly 30% design right now, but there is a lot of conversation about future Beltline transit. And so we are curating an opportunity for people to share their voices and opinions specifically about that. And I will conclude there, Mr. Chair. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you, Clyde. Before I turn it over to colleagues, I did have a couple questions that I wanted to ask.
Yes.
The first one is around Murphy Crossing. I know y'all been working hard with the community and working with the various different proposals for many years, I feel like at this point.
Yes.
To get to the point where y'all have announced. A lot of things I've seen in press releases and in statements by the developers is that this is a pedestrian oasis and that transit and transportation is a key focal point for this development. Can you talk through what that means for the community, what that means for residents of this particular site?
Yeah, so obviously that was born a lot from community. So one of the things that I have to give a shout out to the team for is that they really went deep and had a conversation with the community and community leaders about what they wanted to see at Murphy. And so there was a whole survey that was completed, and a part of that survey was really making sure that we prioritize pedestrian and cyclists with regards to that new redevelopment versus cars. And so one of the things that you will see there, and this is why the cul-de-sac team really rose to the top, but they actually have experience with redeveloping sites and not necessarily having, quote unquote, the requisite parking requirements for those developments. And so what that really means is, can you really develop a site and not have, hundreds and hundreds of cars there, but can you prioritize pedestrians and cyclists? And that's what this group does in spades. We actually had an opportunity to go visit them in Tempe, Arizona. So this is not just conceptual for them. It's something that they're actually doing in Arizona.
And so you had mentioned there's a de-emphasis on cars. Will there be any net new parking on the site?
Yeah, there will be ultimately some parking on the site. I don't know that we could be that aggressive and say that there's not going to be any, but it will not be the requisite, number of parking for square footage. It is going to be significantly decreased. Now, ultimately, that will get debated out, ultimately when it gets over the finish line, but the concept is to not be heavily parked.
And the reason why I'm tugging on this thread a little bit, I need the answers before I ask them, but I just want to emphasize that this is a project that has significant public investment that is, I think, 22 acres is the site, 800 housing units, 180,000 square feet of retail, 150,000 square feet of office and light industrial, and y'all are able to do it or move forward with it without an investment in parking, which I know for developers costs money. I know for communities it creates some havoc because cars people want safe streets. People want to live in a walkable community. So
absolutely. Yeah. So this is an opportunity to walk the walk at the end of the day.
And I imagine there are both public and private developers across the city, across the region, are looking at this project to see how successful it is, because this can very much change the paradigm in how we look at development. How much parking do we really need for a project to be successful?
I mean, I think you touched on something, and that's really what the Beltline is there for, to really push that envelope on kind of what we can do from a development perspective. And I will tell you that there are a number of tenants and organizations that already have interest in that site. And so I'm feeling optimistic, cautiously, but I'm feeling optimistic about the opportunity. And just thinking about that whole corridor is really interesting. So you have Pittsburgh Yards, you have Murphy, you have Lee and White, you have the Met. And so that whole commercial corridor that is starting to percolate up is going to be a juggernaut when it's all said and done. So we have the opportunity to create something new and different with regards to not being so heavily parked. This is the time to do it.
Well, I'm excited. My other question that I had, I'm getting a lot of questions from my Westview constituents around an issue I know y'all have been dealing with for a while with GDOT and with the permitting for a couple of access points along Ralph David Abernathy and South Gordon. Can you give an update on where that stands today?
Yeah, I will have to get back to you specifically on that. I think we've made some progress with GDOT on the permitting side, but let me get back to you specifically on that.
No worries. I appreciate that.
Right.
When you get a reminder, then it's like, well, now I got to find the information. Since you're here, I figured I'd ask. But that's all I have for now. See, my colleagues have a lot of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and go with Councilman Westmoreland. You're up next.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon.
How are you doing?
I'm well. Congrats on Murphy.
Thank you.
I appreciate the update on Garson. Could you talk generally about the time horizon and kind of conceptually about Avon, Chapel, and any other pieces? Do you see Murphy being the template for those other two sites and any others? And then when do you think we'll be able to start recreating that magic?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so for those that need a little bit of context to this, and so I mentioned earlier that we have essentially tripled our land for housing affordability and redevelopment opportunities along the Beltline. And so I made mention of Garson. And can we really replicate that model from a community engagement perspective on Garson, which we hope to go to the community the first quarter of 2023. And then we are actually working on Chapel Road. And so for those that don't know, so Chapel Road is roughly a 30-acre site, a stone's throw away from where Microsoft will be near the Bankhead MARTA site. And ultimately, we will mimic that same process, council member, with regards to Chapel Road. We don't expect to start that in earnest until probably the second quarter of 2023. And then there's also land that we control not far from Murphy. It's about a 9-acre site. We call it Avon. And ultimately, we will figure out what needs to happen with Avon. But that's probably the order right now. Garson, Chapel, and Avon. And we are also being very opportunistic for future land acquisition opportunities. And so I could imagine, early next year, you will hear more announcements from Beltline about additional land that we're trying to acquire. But I definitely need to get a shout out to you because most people don't know this, but the council member was very instrumental in helping us to take down the Chapel Road site. That's one of our largest, land acquisition deals for affordability and redevelopment in Beltline history. And so people that are listening, people are trying to sell land, tell them to bring it over to the Beltline because we are going to curate something that's ultimately beneficial to the community.
Councilmember Westmoreland. Councilmember Hillis.
Thank you, Mr. Higgs, for the updates. Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few things. One, I've been in communication with Jill, and I think you've been a part of the conversation too about how we had this conversation in public safety yesterday about updating the mile markers and ensuring they're integrated into our 911's system, because we've had some incidents where response has been lacking by our agencies due to hard to triangulate where the actual issue is. So if you could give an update on that and what that entails and the rollout.
Absolutely. So I know that we have a meeting on the books with police and fire to really come up with a comprehensive plan on making sure that people, if you're on the Beltline, you can identify kind of where you're at. And so we're in the throes of working out what that program should look like.
Any updates on a potential spur connection between West Side Beltline that you mentioned mostly in Councilmember Amos's district, as well as the West Side Connector Trail, about connecting it to West Side Park, given that's a Beltline park, so a safe.
Yes, and I will tell you, one of the things that we are attempting to do is be very opportunistic, and anytime we can create more connections into the mainline Beltline. And for those that are listening online or perhaps on television, the Beltline is a 22-mile loop. That's what we describe as mainline Beltline. But there are opportunities for us to create little spurs that connect directly, from neighborhoods into the 22-mile loop. And so we are studying that right now. There's a perception that we have a little bit of money right now that we can actually advance things on the Beltline, but we're really just trying to understand the finances of that, and if we can also get some partnerships from the organizations that are going to benefit from this as well. But it's something on our radar screen, and we're not letting that go. And even in Southwest Atlanta, that's one of the things that we're pushing with the Path Foundation, who ultimately advances some of those spur trails along the Beltline.
Last question, as you mentioned and had a slide about you all's involvement in Complete Streets projects. Expand a little bit upon that, where the funding comes from, what the funding was for that specific project, and if you're considering any other projects.
We are. So when you think about the Beltline, so oftentimes the trail is the star of the show. So people think that, hey, you just build trails and that's what you do. But we are responsible for not only building trails, but advancing transit, advancing affordable housing, helping to facilitate permanent jobs along the Beltline corridor, environmental cleanup, and then also complete streets. And so this is a project, again, it's about 2/3 of a mile, I guess, on the east at Boulevard and on the west at Freedom Parkway. And this is a program that was funded by TAD dollars, but also a significant part of those dollars came from REBA funds from state government as well. And so that's how we were able to cobble the money together for this complete streets side of the Beltline. But yes, there are other opportunities that we are going to investigate to create complete streets. And so for those in the audience, what that really means is lights, cameras, bike lanes, full sidewalks. That's what we mean by complete streets. And again, this is the mindset of prioritizing the cyclist, prioritizing the pedestrian versus the car.
Just speaking of that, one area to kind of put on your radar to maybe look into and partner with the Upper West Side CID, which of course covers my district, a portion of Councilmember Norwood's, and also a portion of Councilmember Amos's. And this project would be mostly in Councilmember Amos's district, but Upper West Side CID is contemplating extending the cycle track that city brought it to, I believe, Howell Mill, and then they have instituted one along Brady and along a little further down West Marietta Street. But of course, that doesn't get you to the Beltline or the West Side Connector Trail. So they have come up with a proposal to extend that cycle track all the way to the Beltline there at Marietta Boulevard. However, their CID, their funding is limited. They're a newer CID. So any chance of partnership would be great. They could, possibly do more, getting that cycle track up quicker or with more amenities, et cetera. So I don't know if you've had a conversation or if they've reached out to you, but that's a conversation that would be helpful.
Yeah, definitely familiar with that project, and again, we're always looking for opportunities to be opportunistic and standing up any other groups. Upper West Side CID, West End, other CIDs. We're always trying to figure out ways to partner with them. So, but it's definitely on the radar screen.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilmember Hillis. Councilmember Bakhtiari.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing good.
Good.
First, obviously, thank you for all the work that you all do. You and your team are awesome. I can say nothing but incredible things about Jill Johnson.
Yeah.
Getting to work with her is awesome.
Yes.
I do have a question about the piece on the affordable housing. Happy to see the numbers, but I was hoping that we could break down the definition of affordable.
Yeah, so I'll give you the definition specifically for Beltline pipeline. So what we mean, again, our original remit was 80% of area median income. But if you look at our pipeline, most of our pipeline is at 60% or below with regards to affordability. And this is a great question. So it really kind of highlights the reason why acquiring land is so key. So right there in your district on Memorial Drive, so those units there, we went as deep as, I want to say 30% of
We're
area.
talking about the ones right there in Reynoldstown that that are now under construction.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the reason we were able to do that is because we actually own the land.
Right.
And so that is what we're trying to do. So it's not only providing a pipeline for the city for future land perspectives, but if you can control the dirt, you ultimately have the ability to work out the financials to go deeper with regards to affordability.
And thank you for the breakdown. Would you just, so that a lot of people I found don't understand the terminology of the area median income, would you break down the salary range of what that looks like?
So the HUD, which is a federal agency, has a definition for area median income. So if you're thinking roughly about 80% of area median income, thank you, Jill. This is why she's so great. So if you think about a family of one, so if you're thinking about 60% of area median income, you're roughly talking about $41,000 for a family or household of one. 80% of area median income is roughly $55,000 for a household of one. But again, what we're trying to do from a Beltline perspective, even though our remit is 80% of area median income, we're trying to go deeper with regards to affordability, so 60% and below. And even if you think about Murphy's Crossing, most of the opportunities there will be at that 60% of area median income most of those units that are going to be affordable are going to be affordable from a permanent perspective. And then there's going to be another portion that is affordable for a 30-year period.
I'm glad to hear it. I'm curious if there's been any, because I'm looking at the supported sections of each of these projects, and I'm curious, has there ever been any conversations about the Beltline partnering with continuum of care, on housing along the Beltline, if we were able to, say, procure the land for the Beltline?
So tell me more what you mean by, so I'm
talking also partnering with supportive housing, if there was any opportunity to kind of go into that type of deep affordability.
Yes, and so that 1055 Arden that I mentioned a little bit earlier, a number of those units are actually supportive housing in that development. So yes, that is part of the whole plan, and we're actually executing on that in partnership with Atlanta Housing and Presswick to have supportive housing along the Beltline.
So ideally, the more land that we find where we own the dirt, the more this housing the more deeply affordable we could go.
That if you don't remember any of the stuff that I'm saying, controlling the land is absolutely key with regards to quality, affordable housing when the Beltline or a city organization actually controls the dirt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Bakhtiari. Councilmember Winston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Clyde, for coming today. Also reiterate the wonderful accolades to Jill. She's been wonderful to work with, and recently met with Councilmember Bakhtiari and gave us a great little update of the Southside Trail, which is nearing construction phase. Makes me really excited, and all of my constituents in District 1, as well as those in neighboring District 5. You spoke holistically about the Southside Trail, but I know that there's 4 actually segments. There's 2 and 3, and there's 4 and 5.
Yep.
2 and 3 will receive federal dollars. Thank you, Senator Ossoff, for helping secure those dollars that are much needed.
Yes.
But could you kind of talk a little bit more about the construction phase, and kind of the difference between those 2 segments?
Yes, and thank you for mentioning that too. So one of the things that we often talk about with regards to the Beltline, we talk about the tax allocation district as a funding source. We talk about the philanthropic funding, but we need to make sure that we are lifting up the folks that really push the federal funds to support trail development as well. I love to call them the WOW team. So that's Warnock, Ossoff, and Williams that really support us from a federal perspective. Yes, that deserves a round of applause. And so segments 4 and 5. So we expect to be under construction with segments 4 and 5 probably the first quarter of 2023. We don't expect to solicit segments 2 and 3. So this is roughly from Pittsburgh Yards across the connector to Boulevard. And we don't expect that to be under construction until the fall of 2023, just to kind of give you a timeline.
Are you still expecting that to fall in the umbrella of the 24-month timeline, or probably extending just 2 and 3 just a little bit?
Yeah, so 2 and 3. So once we go under construction, it's roughly going to take us about 24 months to complete that. Once we go under construction for segments 4 and 5, that's going to take us, again, 18 to 24 months to complete that segment.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then can you talk a little bit about if any, or is there any coordination with ATL DOT just about the impacts of traffic in the surrounding neighborhoods? For instance, Boulevard is going to be one of the streets that's going to be impacted. It's a major thoroughfare in my district. And so, to be able to cut that off for construction, what's the coordination with ATL DOT about what that impact is going to look like?
Yeah, so thank you for mentioning that too. So typically we will not make a significant move without some type of coordination, not with only ATL DOT, but a number of the city departments, just to make sure that we're all on the same page with advancing any type of infrastructure related projects. And so yes, we do talk to ATL DOT with regards to any trail related projects.
Awesome. Well, appreciate the updates. I love seeing all those dots on the southeast side for affordable housing projects that are coming, and just continue to just say your team is doing a wonderful job. So thank you.
They are killing it. Thank you for acknowledging them.
Thank you, Councilmember Winston. I believe Councilmember Overstreet, you had a couple questions.
I do. Hello, how are you, Mr. Higgs?
How are you?
Yeah, I want to touch a little bit more about the spur trail and the the process that it takes to actually get a spur trail, because, I've been asking for this since 2018 and probably since, 2019 with you. So this is year, 4? We'll say year 4. And we've identified that the placement of District 11 is the only district in the whole city that doesn't have a spur or a trail or anything, which I understand that, the main Beltline is 22 miles of identified railways, and that's how the Beltline was formed. But we do have a spur system, and we've also identified that District 11 does have a portion of the TAD in it. Yet I hadn't heard a plan yet that would, prioritize the connectivity, where we would have a spur reaching all the way to the only district that doesn't have any portion of the Beltline, a spur or a main line. So I'm hoping that soon I'll see a plan. I have devoted some of my T-Splice dollars for the T-Splice 2.0 to it. I think $1 million to already go with funds that were legislated right before I got on council in hopes of this spur. But, so that'll be a long time that we're waiting for the prioritization of the spur.
Yeah, that is a fair question, and I know that is really important to you, and so you will be happy to know that we have recently finished off some of the remaining real estate issues that were there for that spur, and that was kind of a hanging Chad issue for us, that because there was a lot of title issues and some other real estate challenges there, but I think we have crossed that threshold. And we have also decided that we were going to commit a portion of our TAD dollars specifically to that trail. So that's something that we're committed to. Now we just got to define the other funds, because it's not all within the TAD. So we can use a portion of our TAD dollars to support it, but together with your funds, with some of the TAD funds, and then also funds specifically from the PATH Foundation and what they can raise, I think together then we can figure out a program to advance the construction of it.
So understanding that, how can we as a city have areas that are constantly receiving funds, and we allow areas to not receive any funds from philanthropic or those that are eager to help the city? I think our priorities should matter as well, because you've stated it's important to you, and you're our CEO.
Absolutely, and so that's one of the things that, again, that we've committed from a Beltline organization, is to put those TAD dollars there, and we will be very opportunistic to making sure that we're pulling those other dollars to support specifically that trail segment that you're making reference to, okay. The spur segment.
So can we, talk about a timeline? Again, this is probably, and this only because I've only been here for 4.5 years or almost 5 years, year 5.
Yes, and so we'll share kind of our plan with you. We'll get the PATH Foundation together and have another conversation. I still think there is some remnants of when the city initially had those dollars dedicated to that spur, and those dollars were diverted to another project, and so that's where the PATH Foundation then went to another direction when those dollars were diverted by the city. And so it's going to require some additional coordination, but the pieces are coming together. Now, again, you have support specifically from Beltline, you got support from the PATH Foundation, but we need to figure out how those other dollars are going to come to fruition.
Those dollars that were diverted, we've secured those. They're back in place. I've made sure of that. I mean, I had so many meetings right before COVID, and during COVID, we had Zoom meetings to verify that those dollars are back in place.
They're absolutely there. So again, we got to make sure we coordinate with the PATH Foundation, okay, to make sure that those philanthropic dollars are within their capital campaign. because when those dollars got diverted, they went to kind of their next projects, and then ultimately that got pushed on the side because the city diverted those dollars.
Okay.
I hear you. I hear you.
That was before my time, but I will say that, we've served our 5 years, and I really like for us to prioritize this spur.
Okay. Absolutely. All right.
Thank you, Councilmember Overstreet. Councilmember Bakhtiari.
Now, Clyde, I can hear her teeth grinding over here. Get her that spur.
I can feel them.
Don't mess with Councilmember Overstreet. And I just following up on our conversation again with the affordable housing piece, looking at the numbers based on, I kind of did some basic calculations. So we save about $50,000 a year. We're looking at about $25 an hour, which is essentially $10 higher than the city's minimum wage, close to $19 higher than the state's minimum, or to federal minimum wage, and about $19 higher than the state's minimum wage. So while I deem that to be more affordable than most housing in Atlanta, it's not particularly affordable. So my ask is, and I understand that the cost of land in some areas where the Beltline has gone in, and we look at land values increasing of over 100, over 200% in some areas. So I understand the cost of land being an issue. But given that the crisis seems to be that we're rapidly developing out our working, like our lower income and working communities, what is it that council can do to help partner with the Beltline to ensure actual mixed income, like in actual affordable income? Because the issue being, we say AMI a lot, which is appropriate terminology, and this is not completely on you, this is all of us, can accidentally come off as coded language. So I'm trying to break down the numbers and try to understand how we can really talk about, I'm talking like $20,000, $30,000 income a year.
Helping us to secure more land. That's really how council can be helpful. Mm-hmm. And if you're talking to specifically developers, it comes down to subsidy. I mean, it is really that simple at the end of the day. But for us, if we can control the land, then we can get that deeper affordability, just like at Madison Reynoldstown. Because we control that, we were able to get really deep affordability, and not just affordability for a short period of time, but for a long period and perhaps permanent. That's the key, because you don't want this to flip over in 15 years.
Are you describing going into a partnership with like the land trust and actually putting the property within that?
Absolutely. That's one of the tools out there to make that happen.
A lot to think about. Thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you, Councilmember Bakhtiari. Any other questions or comments from colleagues? Seeing none, I do want to acknowledge that Mr. Higgs made reference to hanging chads earlier, and so I got that reference, and I feel older because of it. So thank you so much, and we'll move on to the next item.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. Next, we have Department of City Planning. Leah LaRue is going to present on NPU best practices. Good to see you, Ms. LaRue.
Good afternoon, council members. Leah LaRue, Department of City Planning. Very happy to be here with you all today, and especially happy to have with us the president of the Atlanta Planning Advisory Board, Ms. Ann Phillips. And I'm also happy to have a couple of my team members over here, Samantha Terry, Tony McNeil, and Nicole Jenkins are also here. All righty. Okay, so by way of background, on May 16th, the Atlanta City Council adopted a resolution by Councilmember Byron Amos urging the Department of City Planning to work with the Atlanta Planning Advisory Board's leadership to develop a set of best practices for neighborhood planning units. We were really excited about this opportunity to collaborate with APAB. I've worked with APAB for 3.5 years now, and we've built really solid relationships with the leadership there and with the entire board on trust, respect, and collaboration. And we've had several conversations this year about increasing APAB's effectiveness and value, the value that they add to the city. We had already begun, our team had already begun working on a best practices document, but frankly, our plan was to have that done by the end of this year. So thank you to Councilmember Amos for lighting the fire that made us get it done much sooner than we thought we could. So we had a number of stakeholders that were involved in the planning of the process. Our internal stakeholders, the key stakeholders, of course, were DCP leadership, the MPU planners, the resources and support staff of MPU, the law department, community development, human services committee, of course, and Councilmember Amos. And then externally, the Atlanta Planning Advisory Board's executive committee, the full board, and MPU's A through Z, and of course, the general public. So a little bit about the process and the timeline before we get into the best practices themselves. Of course, the resolution was adopted in May. In June, we produced a timeline, I forgot the word I'm looking for, a proposed timeline and an outline, and we presented that to the Atlanta Planning Advisory Board's executive committee to get their input on that. They were fine with the timeline and the outline, and with that, we produced draft number 1, and then in July, we produced draft number 2, and in August, we produced and presented the final draft, which was adopted by APAB unanimously. And if you know anything about APAB, you know that that's a big deal because there isn't very much that all the MPUs will agree on, and they all agreed on this best practices document. I do want to point out that considering the size of our team, the number of, the timeline that we were working with, the 90 days, and the number of programs and products that we offer to the MPUs, this was a really ambitious goal. And the process certainly was not without challenges, but I am very proud to say that we were able to work together and get it done. All right, so creating the document, we started out with an internal brainstorming session, recognizing, of course, that we're working with volunteers here. We kicked off the process with 2 internal brainstorming sessions so we could present APAB with something from which to start. We were glad that we did that because APAB was very pleased that they didn't have to start from scratch and figure it all out. We brought something to them that they could work from. I do want to point out, and if you've ever been in any MPU University classes or any other meetings with me, you've probably heard me say this 1,000 times, so forgive me, but I'll say one more time. Our entire team, I'm really proud to say this, our whole team is made up of not only Atlanta residents, but very active members in their neighborhood associations and their MPUs, myself included. So it was really helpful that our whole team could really contribute to the brainstorming session as staff members that are uniquely in the know, that aren't really putting this together for people, but putting it together with people, with the MPUs and with APAB. Our driving principle is equity. Everything that we do, every program that we've created, every initiative, literally everything we do is centered or connected in some way to equity. It may not jump off the page at you, but you'll find that so much of what we recommend here is business as usual in some parts of the city and completely foreign in other parts of the city. So we're looking to make recommendations that will bring other folks up to where other folks are, to where other MPUs are. We used the results of our brainstorming session to create an outline, and we shared that and the proposed timeline with the APAB Executive Committee for their feedback. And once we got their stamp of approval, we used that outline to begin writing the first draft. I'm also proud to say that we were able to incorporate nearly all of the feedback that we got from stakeholders into the final draft. We met with APAB's Executive Committee 3 months in a row, June, July, and August. We met with their general body, June, July, and August. emailed the MPU chairs in July and August, specifically giving them updated drafts and asking for their input and feedback. And we also asked them to share it with all of their members because we wanted to make sure that this got out as far and as wide as we could possibly get it. We also put notices on the MPU agendas, and we created an online feedback form as well and put that on our website so that folks could log on to the website and just send us a quick email to let us know what they thought about the draft. All right, so the best practices, the final document represents the practices that have proven most effective, transparent, and inclusive. It's designed to document what works best for MPUs. It does not replace or supplement the Code of Ordinances, and it's not designed to do that. And it shouldn't be considered a mandate or a directive. There was a lot of concern when we first started talking about this. I'm sure Councilmember Amos got, and maybe some of you as well, got a lot of questions and emails and concerns about whether this was a mandate or whether it was a precursor to system-wide reform, which a lot of MPUs have been calling for reform. But we wanted to make clear that this was not a mandate, it is not a directive, it is not, to our knowledge, a precursor to code or anything like that. It was meant to be a guideline and basically recommendations that the MPUs could use if they wanted to. We also wanted to make clear that MPU members throughout the document, you'll see the use of members a lot, that includes all residents as defined by Section 6-3012 of the code, and that will provide the technical support, will continue to provide the technical support that MPUs may need in order to align with these practices. And by one of the recommendations, we also added to as an attachment, actually as two attachments to the best practices, we added the Code of Ordinances, the section for MPUs, and we also added the ethical guidelines for MPU officers, sorry. So we took all of the feedback that we got in our brainstorming session, and we categorized everything into four categories. We grouped everything according to what was kind of similarly themed, and we came up with these four categories: MPU health, communications, meetings, and application review, and MPU recommendations. I'll go ever so briefly through them. Under MPU health, these recommendations were designed to help MPUs achieve or maintain stability, inclusion, fairness, and adherence to the code. We have 7 sections within MPU health: assessment, participation, fair elections, bylaws review, leadership transition, conflict resolution, education, and training. Under assessment, and most of them are fairly self-explanatory, but under assessment, we encouraged the MPUs to perform some annual self-reviews internally, even membership polls. We do have a couple of MPUs that do an annual survey each year. They send out a survey to all of the members to grade them on their own performance as MPUs and their performance as MPU leadership, et cetera. And we thought that we also listed some of the measures that MPUs could use to assess themselves, including their ability to manage conflict independently. What we find is that most of the MPUs experience conflict. The difference is that most of them manage that conflict independently. They manage it internally, usually quietly. They'll reach out to us if they need some parliamentary support or if they need help, sorting something out or mediation. But generally speaking, they manage it themselves. Also, the number of timely and efficient meetings that they have. One of the key problems that people who don't participate in MPUs have, or people that stop participating, is usually that they feel the meetings are not timely or efficient. We also wanted them to grade themselves on their elections, on whether their elections are transparent, whether they're fair, and timely, because the code does require that their elections are held within a certain time frame, no later than November 30th. Also informed, competent, and fair leadership, their record keeping, and information sharing. And under participation, we really just wanted to make sure that the MPUs are making it easy for residents to participate and minimizing any barriers. The others, like I said, are mostly self-explanatory, but I did want to point out that under education and training, we sought to, in the language that we used, we sought to ensure that it didn't sound like mandates. We wanted to make it clear that these are just recommendations. This is a best practice, but APAB felt very strongly, or some members of APAB felt very strongly that education and training, the language there should be a little stronger than what we had. So that was just one of the areas where we got specific feedback, and we incorporated that into the best practices. The second section was communications. We had under communications, these are all recommendations to help MPUs maintain records and make those records accessible to the public. We had information sharing, which included bylaws, meeting notices, agendas, and applications. If not most, I would say at least many of the complaints that we get from both the residential and the business community alike are around information sharing. People just generally don't feel like it's easy enough to get information from the MPUs, whether that information is a meeting agenda, whether it's a set of bylaws, updated bylaws, whether it's a bylaws draft. We hear a lot about that around this time of year, and even applications. Our team routes the applications that MPUs are to review, but oftentimes they don't get funneled down often. I try to remind applicants, presenters, and even members and neighborhood associations, the general public, that the MPUs are made up of volunteers and that they don't always have the ability to respond, within a reasonable time frame, within a couple of hours. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer than that. But we do encourage that MPUs get enough volunteers or figure out a way, even if it requires our support, to make sure they're getting information out widely. We also encourage them to clearly outline their expectations of applicants and presenters. This is always a sticking point because there are 25 of them, as you all know. And also, as you know, they are very, very different. All 25 of them have different culture, different practices, different rules, different bylaws, of course, and different ways of doing things. And it is sometimes challenging when presenters or applicants come to us asking, what do we need to do next? And we don't necessarily know what the MPU requires of the applicant, and that information isn't always accessible. Oftentimes they will email or call the leadership and not get a response back quickly enough, and it hampers their ability to do their business. So we do encourage MPUs for those that have websites or social media pages, we encourage them to document what their processes are on the website or wherever they can, so that it's easy to understand from people looking to participate in that particular MPU. And then, of course, we always encourage keeping minutes. Some of the MPUs, believe it or not, do not keep minutes, but we encourage them to do so. It makes really everyone's lives easier, the MPUs for sure, and our team as well, when we're trying to sort out and determine what happened 7 years ago at an MPU meeting, or even 7 weeks ago at an MPU meeting. We also want them to keep really good records about voting eligibility. Usually, it often happens around elections, but it also takes place throughout the year where MPUs don't know who's eligible to vote. They have rules around voting eligibility. It's in their bylaws, but there are often there is often conflict around who is eligible to vote and why. So we also encourage them to keep those records and all of their meeting recordings. The third of 4 sections is meetings, and these were recommendations designed to help MPUs run efficient meetings and ensure that members' voices are heard. Of course, we talk about transparency, which includes informing the body of everything that they need to know, not hoarding information among the executive committees, the executive boards, the chairs themselves. Disclosing assets. Some of the MPUs, and in the last 3.5 years, I've had probably 4 or 5 experiences with the changing of the guard or new leadership and trying to figure out what the assets are, where the assets are, who's holding, who's got the assets in custody. Sometimes it's passwords, sometimes it's grant dollars, sometimes it's materials, sometimes it's a book of records, or all sorts of other things. Those things need to be disclosed on a regular basis, whatever the MPU determines is appropriate, but we do encourage MPUs to share that information so that the general body can hold the leadership accountable. And then, of course, publishing the eligible voters. We actually have that weaved throughout the best practices document quite a few times because it shows up in so many different areas, and it really has proven to be a bit of a lifesaver when MPUs publish eligible voters on a monthly basis or on a regular basis, so that there is, you could easily see the list every month and see that your name is not on it and know in advance that for whatever reason the MPU doesn't consider you eligible. You can reach out and find out why, settle any disagreements, as opposed to I've seen up to an hour spent trying to determine whether someone is eligible to vote in an MPU. Secondly, under meetings is efficiency. Of course, it kind of goes without saying, we encourage them to use consent agendas for those MPUs that have really heavy agendas. Some of them are processing 20 applications a month or so. We encourage them to use consent agendas, and many of them do that very successfully. We also encourage them to use unanimous consent for those routine items like approving the agenda, approving the minutes, adjourning, et cetera, because we certainly, and those of you that attend MPU meetings have also seen that sometimes approving the agenda could take a good 10 minutes with no changes to the agenda, just approving it, just counting the votes. So we encourage that. We talked about that quite a bit in our parliamentary procedures classes, kind of walking them through how that works. And then, of course, keeping time. This also cuts down on conflict as well, because we've seen some pretty arbitrary use of keeping time where, you can say, okay, 2 minutes after everyone else has taken 10 minutes to speak or to ask questions, and then you impose a 2-minute rule. We encourage them to read all the rules at the beginning of the meeting. That's under the transparency, informing the body, letting them know what the rules of this meeting might be, so that everybody's on the same page. And then, of course, virtual meetings. This was another category that was heavily edited by the Atlanta Planning Advisory Board, but we definitely encourage the use of video for those that are meeting virtually, for transparency, for sure, and other reasons. It's just more personal to be able to see the person that's speaking to you, the person that's presiding over the meeting. We encourage them to designate hosts. That was something that also came about as a result of a parliamentary procedures class as well. We had early on in the pandemic, and to be fair, it somewhat continues, not as much, but early on during the pandemic, we had quite a few instances of people being removed from meetings that probably should not have been removed from meetings. And the recommendation from the instructor of our parliamentary procedures course was that the chairperson is not the host of the meeting, that someone else would host the meeting so that the chairperson is not single-handedly determining who comes in and who should leave. Lastly, managing complex topics. A lot of times there are some very controversial items on the MPU's agendas, and it could take a lot of time for them to do committee work in the middle of MPU meetings. That happens quite a bit, so we're encouraging them to build out their communities, their committees, understand the role of a committee, and then encourage participation in that committee so they can actually do the committee work in the committee meeting and then come back to the MPU meeting for debate on a motion. We also encourage them to seek information prior to meetings. We get quite a bit of, the department, I will say, provides a tremendous amount of support, and I know Ms. Phillips and others have said quite frequently that they get more support now than really ever before. We do provide a tremendous amount of support, and we have an open door policy. Our phones, I get calls on Sundays. Some of the folks in this room have called me on Saturdays, Sundays, 7 a.m., 10 p.m., and they know if I hear the phone ring, I'm going to answer it. Throughout the department, we have people that answer the phone, maybe not on weekends, but very regularly. And so it's always best. We appreciate when they present questions and concerns about legislation in advance of the meetings. And of course, then we encourage them to adhere to rules of order and announce any time limits that they may have. Lastly, the last section is application review and recommendations. And these recommendations were designed to help MPUs strengthen the recommendations that they provide to the city. This was another area that we received some feedback from the Atlanta Planning Advisory Board. We had incorporated all the recommendations into one, and they wanted to see, APAB wanted to see the CDP spelled out separately. So we did add another section for the CDP, and we encouraged them to review the required elements of the CDP, including the community work program, capital improvement element, and to coordinate with neighborhoods and MPUs and periodically review and update policies. This goes back to my earlier mention of equity. These are some of the things that go without saying in many of the MPUs. Many of them do this like clockwork. They don't think twice about it. They have very well-oiled machines and they do this stuff regularly. And there are others that really struggle with how to go about making recommendations, using the CDP to inform those recommendations, et cetera. We also make recommendations around processing applications. As I mentioned, we encourage them to outline and publish a very clear process for review so that the members and the public understands what that process looks like. We encourage them to communicate clearly and timely with applicants, recognizing that they're volunteers, and to process the applications that are routed by DCP. Every so often, I would say a few times a year, we get MPUs reaching out to us in a panic because they've spent months working on an application that they later find out did not come from, or later realized did not come from DCP or from the city. That happens quite a bit. We encourage them not to process applications that didn't come from our department. Otherwise, we don't know where it came from or where the recommendation is even going. And of course, we encourage them to share all of the relevant information with the committee of purview, the neighborhood orgs, and the business orgs. And then, of course, under application review, we talk about documenting any conditions and comments very clearly. This, we believe, would help clear up some of the concerns that MPUs have about not being heard and about the city not taking their recommendations seriously. Oftentimes the conditions are not clearly spelled out or they don't align very well with the code, so we encourage them to do that as well, to consult with the code, to consult with the CDP, with their area plans and any other application criteria. We also encourage them to document dissenting opinions so that their recommendations have more value with the council and with the different departments in the city. We want them to share the dissenting opinions, not just a vote of support or a vote of non-support. We also want them to explain their votes of non-support. If they don't support something, we want them to explain why they don't support it so that we can communicate that appropriately to the deliberative body or the council. And And as it relates to finalizing their recommendations, we encourage them to dot all of the I's and cross all of the T's around voting. We have lots and lots of issues with voting. Sometimes motions are not clear, or motions are not restated, and people think they're voting on one thing and they vote on another thing, and it's compounded even further when they're not recording minutes, so we really have no way of knowing what went down in that meeting. So we do encourage them to vote properly, record those motions as stated, and make sure that the community is apprised in advance of any voting items. Our next steps, one of the things that I meant to mention earlier is that part of the resolution that came out of this committee was that we incorporate or consider incorporating a Bill of Rights. We plan to do that as part of this best practices document, and a few of the members of APAB felt that we should, as opposed to making it a part of this process, that we should have a whole separate process for the Bill of Rights. So we agreed to take that out of this and do the Bill of Rights process separately. I can tell you in advance that it will be very, very objective and very objectively based on the code, without any subjectivity or room for grays, shades of gray. It'll be definitely based on what the code says the members' rights are. And our next steps are to publish this document online and in print for distribution, and then of course get started on the Bill of Rights work. And that is it.
Thank you so much, Ms. LaRue. And I know for me, that was a thorough presentation, so I don't have any questions, but I do want to give my colleagues an opportunity to ask questions. And I'll let Councilmember Amos speak last, since I know you have a comment. I know this is driven by your legislation. Councilmember Overstreet.
Thank you, Chair Dozier. Ms. LaRue, thanks for giving us this presentation today on best practices for NPUs, because as you know, we are at a place where we definitely need to have best practices. You mentioned several times transparency, disclosure, hoarding of information. I'm feeling like we have not been using our best practices, but we should start now, for sure. Do you agree that we could do better?
Absolutely, no question.
Okay, and so I do definitely encourage sharing of information, because I just feel like, the work session is long overdue, and the legislation that I'm putting forth today is so that we could always be in communication about what happens in our city, and I think transparency and everything that you mentioned today, we should absolutely abide by at all times. And that's the internal customer. That would be you as my customer, me as your customer, and external customers. Those are our taxpayers. So I think that we owe best practices to everyone, all of us, internal and external.
Agreed.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Overstreet. Anyone else with any questions? Councilmember Amos.
Thank you, Ms. LaRue, just to you and your team, planning department, and to APAB and all of the APUs. Just want to say thank you. As a former NPU chair and vice chair and a member of APAB, that was pre-COVID. Then coming out of COVID, being in a position to have to attend several NPUs, I did see each NPU doing things differently. I won't say their own thing, doing things differently, but at the same time, still representing the city of Atlanta. So this best practices is something I knew that we needed. And when I asked for it, I really didn't know what I was asking for, but I'm glad to see the planning department actually reached out to APAB like the legislation called for. But more importantly, APAB reached out to the individual NPUs, because I know a time there the NPUs stopped participating in APAB, and it flows back and forth. So I did stop short of making this a code type thing, but I think it achieved what we was going after, of having the NPU and the city to look at each other and the system itself to see what we could do better and can do better and will do better. So now we do have a set of best practices that not everyone agreed with, but the majority of the people that participated in NPUs agreed with. And there are some good things that we can stand on, will stand on. So I just want to say thank you for your work, and thank you to all of the NPUs and to APAB as well for creating this document.
Councilmember Amos, I do want to point out, because you brought it up, when I came into this role in May of 2019, APAB had a very challenging time meeting quorum. In fact, they were that year debating changing their bylaws to lower the quorum to, was it 11, I think? I think they were lowering the quorum to 11 because they couldn't get people in the room. And today they have approximately 22 MPUs that participate regularly. I think last month was 19, if I remember correctly. So typically they're between 18 and 22 every single month. And that is new. And they are meeting in person, like all of the other city-based organizations are. So this isn't just a virtual meeting thing. They're meeting in person, and they have more engagement now than they have in recent years. And their vote to support this was unanimous. Ms. Phillips, did you want to speak to it at all? No?
Well, I was just telling Ms. LaRue that I really didn't have anything to say. She had covered everything. I would like to thank Councilmember Amos for not only sponsoring this resolution, but appearing at APAB and speaking to the body so that they developed that confidence that they needed in all of what we had done to get this down on paper. There's never going to be any time where you have everybody agreeing on everything. But when you can get 22 of 25 NPUs to say, yes, I like this, you've done your job. And I want to thank you again for making this a possibility.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Amos, and thank you to both of you all for your presentation. All right. On to our legislative items. I don't think we have any ordinances for first reading, so we'll move right into ordinances for second reading. We have a communication that needs to be held. Continue.
Item number 1 is 22C 5153, a communication from council members Byron D. Amos, District 3, Jason Dozier, District 4, and Michael Julian Bond, Post 1 at Large, appointing Ms. Kristen Halloran to serve as a member of the Atlanta Urban Design Commission in the Architect 1 category. This appointment is for a term of 3 years.
Move to hold. Second by Westmoreland. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
The motion to hold is adopted. 6 yeas, 0 nays. Next item.
Item number 2 is 22-01731, an ordinance by Community Development Human Services Committee to amend ordinance number 20-01216 to correct the account string and associated funding information and for other purposes.
Deputy Commissioner Voss, just want to, if you had any comments to add to this.
Sure, just good afternoon, Councilmember Dozier and members of council. In May of 2020, this council approved and adopted our first legislation creating Lake Charlotte, which is the first property we purchased through the Tree Trust Fund. It also included a maintenance plan. One of the account strings on that maintenance plans was incorrect. This just adjusts that. It does not change the funding, just to change the correcting and making sure the allocated funds are correctly used for this year.
Thank you. There was a motion to approve by Westmoreland. I will second. Any discussion before we move forward with the vote? Seeing none, please open the vote.
The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
The motion is favorable, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Next item.
Item number 3 is 22-01732, an ordinance by Community Development Human Services Committee authorizing the mayor on behalf of the Department of Parks and Recreation to accept a reimbursement grant from the Georgia Recreation and Parks Association in an amount not to exceed $300,000.00 in accordance with Section 2-910 of the Atlanta Code, and authorizing an amendment to the fiscal year 2023 intergovernmental grant fund budget to anticipate and appropriate, and authorizing the mayor or his designee on behalf of the city to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Georgia Recreation and Parks Association and for other purposes. There's an amendment emailed to each member during the meeting. It attaches an MOU mentioned in section 2.
I'll move to amend. Second by Westmoreland. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
The amendment carries 5 yeas, 0 nays. Deputy Commissioner Voss.
Just wanted to note, Mr. Chair, that this is the third time, I've been to this committee several times in the last year. This is the third time in a row we've actually received this grant from the Georgia Rec and Park Association, totaling over $700,000 for after-school programs. So just want to commend the staff for reaching out for this grant and receiving it. So thank you.
I do have a quick question. What are there any programs in particular that are earmarked or relying on this funding before?
It could be used for many things, but it's generally used for supplies. So this will provide supplies for both Camp Best Friends and after school.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll move approve as amended. Second by Westmoreland. Any discussion? Seeing none, please open the vote.
The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
All right, the motion is favorable as amended, 6 yeas, 0 nays. Next item.
Item number 4 is 22-01733, an ordinance by Community Development Human Services Committee to adopt the 2023 to 2027 capital improvements element, which includes capital improvements that the city intends to fund in whole or in part with development impact fees in compliance with the requirements of the Georgia Development Impact Fee Act and for other purposes.
And for this, we have Ms. Tiffany Cope with the Department of City Planning.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. This paper is to adopt the 2023-2027 capital improvements element. State law does require the city update and adopt the CIE by October 31st of each year. The CIE has successfully progressed through public review, as well as review and approval by both ARC and DCA. So we are before you today seeking approval to move the CIE forward towards final adoption so that we may finalize the required update process. Thank you.
Any questions or comments from colleagues before? Councilmember Hillis.
Just wanted to ensure, were there any recommended changes in that process that we had to make?
Absolutely not, thankfully. ARC, like I said, did their review and they did not come back with any comments or feedback that needed to revise the document. So we're in good standing there.
Thank you.
I'll move approval. Second by Hillis. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
Motion is favorable, 6 yeas, 0 nays. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item.
There's a substitute for item number 5 in your packet. It's going to add co-applicants to this grant. Would you like to bring forward the substitute?
Please. I'll move to bring forth the substitute. Second by Westmoreland. Thank you.
The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
All right, the motion to bring forth the substitute is approved. 6 yeas, 0 nays. We have,
I'll read
we need a caption. Go ahead.
Item number 5 is 22-01734. A substitute ordinance by Community Development Human Services Committee, an ordinance waiving the requirements of Chapter 2, Article 9, Division 1, Section 2-910 of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Atlanta, Georgia, and authorizing the mayor or his designee, including the Commissioner of the Department of City Planning, to apply for a community composting and food waste reduction pilot project grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture in an amount not to exceed $300,000.00, with the co-applicants including Compost Now, Inc., Community Farmers Markets, Inc., Groundwork Atlanta, Institute for Local Self-Reliance, Think Green, Inc., and Truly Living Well, in order to create and test plans for organizing and carrying out municipal composting programs and food waste reduction programs. and to enter into any necessary agreements for the acceptance and implementation of the grant if awarded and for other purposes.
And we have John Seidel, who is the Sustainability Director with the Office of Resilience. Good to see you today, sir.
Thank you, Councilmember Dozier. John R. Seidel, Deputy Chief Sustainability Officer for Office of Resilience. I think you read it just fine. Why we are applying retroactively is some federal grants give us a very short timeline in order to be able to apply, but it's a massive opportunity to support community composting and food waste reduction in our communities and get a lot of that funding to a lot of the organizations, nonprofits, and for-profits that are helping build out our community composting infrastructure. It's a massive opportunity for not just compost itself, which is really helpful for our urban agriculture and food systems work, but at the same time, food waste is one of the top climate emissions from methane when it gets to landfill. So when we can reduce food waste through composting and creating that circular system, supporting our growers here in Atlanta, it's something that we don't want to pass up. And glad to take any more questions.
Any comments or questions before? Just real quick, before I make a motion, I do want to just ask that as if we're successful in getting the grant and any other efforts that we have around sustainability and even initiatives like composting, would love to see more education campaigns in communities like mine in Mechanicsville and in Southwest Atlanta, where the rate of utilization of a lot of these programs are a lot less than maybe what we might see in Northeast Atlanta. Recycling is one of the things that I know comes up a lot, and just would love to see the city do more around those education efforts. I think it's good that we're pushing for these sorts of things, but I feel like too often many of our residents are missing out on these opportunities. So I just want to make that comment. And before I make a motion, I see Councilmember Bakhtiari had something to add.
Yes, so thank you. And thank you for that, Councilmember Dozier, because I think, yes, in many ways, I will say it in a bit more straightforward way. In many ways, sustainability and resiliency is whitewashed, and so it needs to be more accessible to especially lower income communities. I love this because obviously more than half the food half the waste that's put out on the curb nationally is compostable. And you're right, it contributes to a lot of methane gases. So my question is, I understand the grant piece. Could you break down what exactly it would do?
Absolutely. So first, we named Compost Now. We're looking at 10 different community food waste drop-off sites at 10 different locations. So everybody can have equitable access around the city of Atlanta to be able to compost and create that compost that I was talking about, and then actually getting that back to Atlanta growers as a part of our Grows a Lots program with the Fresh Food, Urban Agriculture and Food Systems team. The Grows a Lots program turns vacant city-owned lots into food-producing landscapes, and that's just the inherently valuable material. The second piece with community farmers markets will be helping also with the community food waste drop-off program by hosting drop-off locations at their weekly farmers markets, and efforts double as marketing as well as education for our in total community compost programs citywide. The third piece for Groundwork Atlanta, actually investing in the infrastructure needed to be able to break down and help support our community composting work. So Groundwork Atlanta, who also helps support us on our Grows a Lots programs, will actually be purchasing equipment to grow their carbon farm pilot, and this equipment will be used to break down more waste so that we can serve as an alternative to a landfill for food producers and make waste more usable for different applications and more available for farmers and our community partners. Fourth piece is for the Institute of Local Self-Reliance is actually creating a city community compost plan where we're getting all these organizations together in a more formalized way that can, one, help guide our comprehensive food systems plan, but at the same time also make sure that we're not the only ones that are aware of these opportunities. There's a lot of money that's coming down from the USDA in federal grants that a lot of our partners, these opportunities can slip through if we're not all on the same page. So by communicating and by being on the same page with all these different organizations and creating overall community composting plan, we can be ready for these opportunities in the future. And let's see, and Think Green Incorporated. So this will actually be designing and installing 2 different solar-powered organic waste or organic waste composting systems that are also used as demonstration systems. And these will be at the Outdoor Activity Center, Farm and Community Garden, with our partner West Atlanta Watershed Alliance. And then 2 systems, in-vessel solar-powered composting systems, will be installed at two schools located in the city of Atlanta. And TGI, Think Green Incorporated, will work on-site with students, their teachers, and staff for 1 year in educating and assisting the schools in creating these actual systems and standards for operation, data collection, recording, reporting, and all the good stuff. And then I believe lastly is giving to Truly Living Well, who has a community composting lab, and then actually giving them funds to be able to buy the infrastructure needed to be able to, they process about 100 tons of compostable material per year. That's both, and like create 100 tons of compost. So by being able to invest in their carbon capture technology, they're able to take in a lot of, wood chips, leaves, things that might have otherwise gone to the landfill from landscapers, and because that's a critical material that's needed to mix with food and nitrates, you need a carbon material. And so this helps build out their carbon material capacity. And
so it sounds like this grant does a lot of good for the city of Atlanta.
and it's not just for the city of Atlanta. You asked the question.
Yes,
so
I did
answer it.
ask the question.
Yeah.
I did ask the question.
But that's it. That's all.
Is that a motion?
That's a motion to approve.
Approve on substitute by Bakhtiari, second by Dozier. Any discussion? Seeing none, please open the vote. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
All right, the motion is approved on substitute, 6 yeas, 0 nays. Okay, next item.
Item number 6 is 22-01747, an ordinance by council members Marcy Collier Overstreet, Andrea L. Boone, Antonio Lewis, Howard Shook, Michael Julian Bond, and Keisha Shawn Waits to amend the City of Atlanta Code of Ordinances, Part 2, Chapter 3, Article B, Section 6-3013, to require the City Council approve any changes to the existing boundaries of the neighborhood planning units and for other purposes.
All right. Well, Councilmember Overstreet's been waiting a long time to get to this point. So, Councilmember Overstreet, you want to give it?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair Dozier. I am asking for approval on this particular ordinance, colleagues, for the obvious reasons. I do believe that something as important as our NPU boundaries that everyone has stated been in effect for the last 47 years, and the city of Atlanta has changed tremendously. I do believe it requires participation from the community as well as council, and it definitely should be something that we are the last eyes to set our, to look at. So for that reason, this ordinance is asking that we update our code to just bring those papers before us. I think the work session will be something where we can look at a proper process for NPU boundary changes, create a timeline that will be something that's doable for the city and city council, as well as it'll be an opportunity for us to identify the other ordinances that several of my constituents talked about today. I do believe this is an opportunity for us to get our NPU right, but first and foremost, we need to change this ordinance so that this type of, the eyes that are needed from City Council for approval come before us. So I ask for no abstentions. I ask for all hard yeses so that we can get this process going.
Thank you, Councilmember Overstreet. Any questions or comments from colleagues before? All right, I'll entertain a motion. And there was, I think, Councilmember Westmoreland, motion by Westmoreland, second by Bakhtiari. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
The motion is favorable, 6 yeas, 0 nays. I believe that is our last ordinance for second reading. And next, we have resolutions.
Item number 7 is 22R4342, a resolution by council members Andrea L. Boone, Marcy Collier Overstreet, Antonio Lewis, Howard Shook, Michael Julian Bond, and Byron D. Amos, requesting the proposed reconfiguration of neighborhood planning unit boundaries in the southwest Atlanta quadrant be submitted by the Department of City Planning be reevaluated to request the Chief Operating Officer of the City of Atlanta to bring any proposed reconfiguration to an immediate halt and for other purposes.
Councilmember Overstreet, I believe you're speaking to this as well.
I sure can. I am 100% committed to make sure that this process is halted so that it can be done properly. My council member Andrea Boone is here, who understood how important it was for us not to only have an ordinance that changed our code, but to also have a resolution to stop the process that's being incorrectly done at this time. So again, I ask for no abstentions. I ask for hard yeses. Please support this resolution. Would you like to speak, Councilmember Boone? Okay, thank you.
There's a motion to approve by Westmoreland, second by Bakhtiari. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
Motion is favorable, 6 yeas, 0 nays. I do want to say, just reiterate what I stated earlier. I know the administration has already moved to put a pause on this, but this is just the exclamation point, it sounds like. And I'll give you some final remarks, since I know you've been waiting with us most of the day.
Yes, final remarks. Thank you very much for reminding me of that. I want to thank the administration also for answering my call, calling me back with updated information, and understanding how important it is that both of these pieces of legislation are on the consent agenda for our next full council. They've been nothing but helpful once they realized that the process was flawed. And we are headed in the right direction now. And they're very supportive of a work session and a better timeline. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Overstreet. Let me know if you want me to put a word in to get you on this committee next cycle.
No.
All right, next item.
Item number 8 is 22R4411, a resolution by Community Development Human Services Committee authorizing the mayor or his designee on behalf of the Department of Parks and Recreation to enable a donation in the total amount not to exceed $50,000.00 to Chastain Horse Park Ltd. and a Georgia nonprofit corporation in order to support its mission of empowering riders of all abilities through life-changing relationships with horses from the accounts listed therein and for other purposes.
Deputy Commissioner Voss.
Thank you, Chairman Dozier. This resolution authorizes a donation of up to $50,000. Many people might not know, but this is one of only 2 remaining urban horse parks in the United States. It has been part of the Atlanta inventory for over 90 years. We have a great partner in the Chastain Horse Park that offers both professional ridership programs, riding lessons, and a therapeutics program. They are embarking on a $9 million campaign to improve facilities at Chastain Park. Those will vet to the city. But this resolution would donate $50,000 towards that goal. Many of our programs, including Camp as Friends, utilize the therapeutics program based out of Cohen Park, where we have our therapeutics program ourselves. So we appreciate your consideration of this resolution.
Any questions or comments for Deputy Commissioner Voss? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and move approval. Second by Winston. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
The motion is favorable, 5 yeas, 0 nays. That takes us off of resolutions. We have no dual referred items, but then we have a couple items off of held, and I believe we should be able to get through these relatively quickly.
Item number 18 is 22O1439, CDP 2219, an ordinance by Community Development Human Services Committee to amend the land use element of the 2021 Atlanta Comprehensive Development Plan so as to redesignate property located at 220 Pearl Street Southeast from the industrial land use designation to the mixed use land use designation and for other purposes.
Ms. Lavenier.
Yes, hello. Jessica Lavenier with the Office of Zoning and Development. And this is application for mixed use. The proposal is to develop it with a 4-story multifamily building with 229 residential units, and there's no commercial. It's purely multifamily, and it's a parcel located in the Reynoldstown neighborhood. It's about 2.8 acres. So this has been included in several plans. One of them is the Beltline plan, sub-area plan for Memorial, and that plan recommends to have high density along major corridors like Memorial Drive, and then to transition, step down along the single-family residential portion of Reynoldstown. And Pearl Street is mainly a single-family residential street, and it recommends 1 to 4 stories, like a MR4A, a multifamily residential neighborhood zoning. It's also included in the Reynoldstown and Beyond plan, and that plan recommended a medium-density residential for this parcel. So the proposed development and the land use is not consistent with the adopted plans for this neighborhood. So staff recommends denial of this land use application.
Thank you. And I believe this item, or this site is in District 5.
It is.
Bakhtiari,
Correct.
want to speak to that?
Appreciate staff's recommendation. The neighborhood actually worked really hard on this one. So we are in constant meetings with the developers. The neighborhood drafted a community benefits agreement with them. They actually took a story off the building. I made sure to even call the head of the zoning committee before the meeting just to double check that the neighborhood was on board and wanted this moving forward, and they assured me that they did. So the neighborhood was heavily involved in conversations, which I attended, and they're very excited about the agreed upon development.
Good.
So I have a move to approve.
Motion to approve by Bakhtiari, second by Hillis. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
Motion is favorable, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Next item.
Item number 28 is 22-0-1660, CDP 2232, an ordinance by Community Development and Human Services Committee to amend the land use element of the 2021 Atlanta Comprehensive Development Plan so as to redesignate property located at 241 and 253 Boulevard Northeast, 239 and 240 Howell Street Northeast, 487, 491, 495, 499, 505, 509, 515, 519, 523, 533, 539, and 545 Highland Avenue Northeast. And the parcel numbers listed here from medium density residential land use designation to the mixed use land use designation and for other purposes.
Ms. Lavenier.
Yes, thanks. So this development is a multi-story, multi-family development that this one does include commercial, 53,000 square feet of commercial. So it is a mixed-use building that they're proposing. And this is in the Old Fourth Ward neighborhood of MPUM and Council District 2. And there are 18 parcels that make up about 3.3 acres. And this was in the Old Fourth Ward neighborhood plan. And some of the goals of the plan are to have diverse and sustainable mix of housing, employment, and shopping, and to focus growth along corridors. So it's on the corner of Boulevard, Highland, and Freedom Parkway, and those are collector streets where we are encouraging more intense growth and development. It's served by MARTA Transit. And for this, they have redevelopment nodes that focus along certain parts along Boulevard where we have higher and more intense use, and this parcel is included in that. The plan recommends residential 5 to 9 stories and then transitioning to lower heights and less intense as it goes into the neighborhood. So the higher intensity is on Boulevard and North Highland, and then it steps down as you go further east along Highland. It also has commercial uses at the corner of North Highland and Boulevard. So this development is very consistent with the adopted plan for this neighborhood. So staff recommends approval of this land use amendment.
Thank you. And I believe the MPU also supported this land use amendment as well.
Apparently they voted on July 25th to support this land use amendment.
And since both the MPU and staff are aligned, I'll go ahead and move approval. Second by Winston. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
Motion is favorable, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Next item.
Item number 29 is 22-01661, CDP 2235, an ordinance by Community Development and Human Services Committee to amend the land use element of the 2021 Atlanta Comprehensive Development Plan so as to redesignate property located at 1185 Irish Street Southwest from the single-family residential land use designation to the mixed-use, low-density land use designation and for other purposes.
Lavinier.
Yes, so this development will, it will be rezoned to MRC1, and they're proposing to build 18 housing units and 7,900 square feet of commercial, so another mixed-use development. And it's located in the Pittsburgh neighborhood of NPUV. It's 2 parcels, they're vacant, it's about 0.1 acres, and this is included in 2 plans, the Preservation of Pittsburgh Plan and also the Atlanta Beltline Subarea 2 Plan. So the Pittsburgh Plan encourages the redevelopment of vacant lots into a more urban form. This is on University Avenue, which is classified as a collector street. So the plan encourages more intense development on collector streets and the creation of walkable, livable streets. And it encourages street-oriented infill buildings on vacant lots, and the Beltline Plan recommends mixed-use 1 to 4 stories on parcels on University Avenue. So again, this development is consistent with both plans that have been adopted by City Council, so staff recommends approval of this land use amendment.
And I believe the NPU supported this one as well.
That's correct. They voted on August 8th.
Right.
To support that.
I'll move approval. Second by Winston. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
All right, the motion is favorable, 5 yeas, 0 nays. I believe that was our final legislative item.
That's it.
Any general remarks from colleagues? I will just close this out to say, just another reminder, we'll be hosting a CDHS work session on NPU boundaries, October 27th in the City Council chambers at 9:30 a.m. Staff will send a calendar invite to council members later today. Thank you all so much. This meeting is adjourned.